All right, everybody. I hope you guys are doing well. Um, you should be watching this on Thursday, April 16th. So, as far as something I want you to do, obviously put something from this day in history, April 16th, and also a famous birthday from this day in history on your assignment for the notes today on the 16th. You should have by now watched the entire rise of the Third Reich. You don't need to watch the fall apart. That's the second part of the video. So if you've watched that, you're getting ahead of yourself. And I didn't have any questions for that yet. You will have those later, and it'll be a couple of weeks before you get to those. I hope you enjoyed the video. We actually will have a Zoom meeting on Monday and discuss some of the things from the video. Um, just your thoughts. There's parts of it I find kind of creepy and crazy, the kind of control that the Nazis had over Germany. And we will start covering the Nazis next week and even into the next week. We'll take couple weeks to kind of cover the Nazis and the rise to power of Hitler and the Nazi Party and how that happens. So today, what we're going to focus on is continuing with the Soviet Union, and then we'll move on to fascist Italy, and that will be what we cover today. So let's get going on that right now. So, talking about strengthening the USSR, in 1924, Vladimir Lenin died, and there was no clear successor to him, although it did come down to two different people, Leon Trotsky and, of course, Joseph Stalin. Um, First off, I don't know if you know Joseph Stalin's real name is not Joseph Stalin. I'm not even going to try to say his name. It's like Joseph. I'll try, but it's going to be terrible. Joseph Vissarionovich Dukalashvili or something like that. It's seriously that complicated, and I still didn't say it right. But Joseph Stalin. Stalin actually means man of steel, so it's kind of interesting. He chose to take that name for himself. If you remember Trotsky, he was the leader of the Red Army during the Civil War that kind of took place after the Communist Revolution and the Communist takeover. So he was pretty high up in the Communist Party as well as Stalin. Stalin tried to make it appear that he was Lenin's best pal and always there at his side. Stalin went so far as to alter photos to put himself at the side of Lenin in a lot of photos that he probably wasn't even there for. It doesn't mean that he didn't know Lenin, but he wasn't the clear-cut leader. However, over a couple-year period, uh, Stalin is able to put down Trotsky's side and become the dictator of the Soviet Union. Trotsky was uh, much more well known for his fiery speeches. Stalin was quiet but ruthless and willing to do whatever it took to seize and take control. So by 1927, he's the dictator of the USSR. Um, Stalin, before Lenin had died, had appointed a lot of his supporters into high government positions. So he played the political game well, and he used them to influence and force Trotsky and their supporters out of the government. Eventually, Trotsky actually eventually went to Mexico, where he was killed. Um, Nobody knows exactly how he was killed. It's kind of mysterious, but it does seem that Stalin, even all the way to Mexico, he couldn't get away from Stalin's heavy hand. Once Stalin became the leader, he began his new economic plans that were known as five-year plans. These programs were designed to build up industrial production and to collectivize. So I had you guys talk about this kind of last week. Collectivization is just putting things under government control. Agriculture would be one of the things that he would attempt to put under complete government control. He wanted to return his country to complete socialism and a complete socialist economy where the government runs and controls everything. Remember, Lenin had to backtrack from that and reintroduce some capitalism into their economy. Um, the government established production goals for each industry. Some heavy industries were able to meet the government's demands, but many others did not meet the manufacturing demands of the government and manufacture enough products. Typically, products were always in short supply. Inefficient bureaucratic mismanagement further illustrated the serious weaknesses of the communist economic system. Through Stalin's program to collectivize agriculture, it was met with hostile resistance by the peasants and the people who owned farms. However, the secret police um, were armed and they did whatever they deemed necessary to put the farmers under government control and the farms under government control, sometimes including executing farmers and also deporting farmers to work camps, also burning peasant homes. Sometimes the peasants burned their crops and killed their own livestock before the government could take them. So this is going to lead to food shortages and severe famine in the country because the government's burning some of the things, and then the peasants themselves are burning some of the things. Because if the government's going to take it over, then they don't want them to get anything good out of it because they're fighting back against the government. However, in the end, the resistance was crushed. More than half the homes in the Soviet Union were destroyed from 1928 to 1933. More than half, because the government uh, take over here, and obviously, like I said, severe famine struck the country. Uh, so, obviously, more deaths were resulted in putting these people in work camps. It is estimated that just in collectivizing farming industry and agriculture, that 5 million people lost their life in the Soviet Union. I say that because we all hear about the deaths because of, due to the Holocaust, and we should. That is a terrible moment in history and something we should hear about. And I'm sure you guys are aware that Stalin killed millions of people. But if you look at the narrative that's out there today, communism kind of gets a pass and doesn't get uh, the the credit. And when I say credit in a negative way, but the credit deserves for how bad it is. Stalin killed at least an estimated 20 million people to solidify his power. Hitler didn't kill that many. Uh, we're not even talking about communist China today. But eventually, when communism takes over in China, Mao Zedong killed nearly 60 million people in his time in office to maintain power in China. So the communism killed way more people than fascism or Nazism ever did. Now, I'm not saying fascism or Nazism are good. They are terrible as well. Both are terrible. But for some reason today, communism has some acceptance in our society and fascism is seen as terrible when they, in reality, are both terrible. Neither one are good. So this begins a time period when Stalin's 5-year plans had other significant results. First, economic depression hit the Western democracies in the 1930s. Obviously, this is due to the Great Depression hitting the United States and hitting the rest of Europe as well. Stalin turned to a planned economy. Many naive Western nations, blind to the failures of Stalin's programs because Stalin was not showing what was really going on in the Soviet Union, actually marveled and thought that Russia was doing well because they were modernizing industry. The thing is, they were doing it through force and through killing people. So many nations actually began to look to the Soviet Union, including some people in FDR's cabinet and the vice president even kind of looked upon the Soviet Union as a good example of a good use of government power. Like I said, they didn't see a lot of the bad things that were happening. So Stalin, like we said already, often resorted to violence, even upon the Russian people. But during 1936 to 1938, he even turned upon his own communist party, determined to wipe out anyone who might be disloyal to his regime. To accomplish this goal, he instituted a system of purges in which about 800,000 Communist Party members were murdered, including many of the ruling elite. Even the military suffered here as Stalin ordered the execution of most of the army's top leaders and many of the lesser officers, which isn't going to help towards the beginning of World War II because a lot of their good military leaders had been killed. These events created so much fear that no one dared, challenge Stalin's power in the future. Stalin killed people who if he just hinted and thought maybe you had some inkling of, taking over the government or not standing with him on wherever he stood on issues, he put you to death. There didn't have to be a lot of evidence for him to try to seize control and to kill anybody, no matter what happened. Because communism seeks to control every aspect of life, the Soviet Union and state under Lenin and Stalin had a strong effort to wipe out Christianity completely within their territory. Within 20 years, the government had forced the closure of thousands of churches and schools and had killed many pastors and priests. The Soviet government's cruelty was based on the realization that Christian virtues were contrary to communist ideas. Their hatred for Christianity can be illustrated in these words of Vladimir Lenin. So let me read a quote from Lenin about religion. Every religious idea, every idea of God, even flirting with the idea of God, is unutterable vileness, vileness of the most dangerous kind, contagion of the most abominable kind. Millions of sins, filthy deeds, acts of violence, and physical contagions are far less dangerous than the subtle spiritual idea of a God decked out in the smartest ideological costumes. So according here to Lenin, religion and Christianity is worse than violence. It's worse than filthy deeds because it corrupts people's minds. Because it would be a challenge to communism. For communism to work, your God basically is the state, is the government. And they need to eradicate anything that stands in the way of the government being supreme in people's lives. They wanted the government to be seen as savior and not obviously Jesus to be seen as savior. Lenin even said um, that Christianity and religion was like a drug that people use to just feel good. So there was a serious hatred amongst communists towards Christianity and religion in general. As far as foreign policy, after the Bolshevik Revolution, Lenin believed the communist revolutions would soon sweep across Europe. So to further his goal, he started something called Communist International, which is commonly called Comintern. They did this to found communist parties in other countries and take an active role in stirring up discontent in the hopes of producing revolution in other countries. They would start, like I said, communist parties in America, in other European countries, in countries in Asia to try to stir up trouble. Under Stalin, Soviet foreign policy shifted away from open radicalism of the early years. Stalin, like Lenin, hoped to see communism spread, but he focused more on establishing his power at home instead of spreading it before he established that power. So he eventually did want to push for a world revolution, and his hope too was that his country would gain diplomatic recognition because for a while, because of the violent overthrow and the illegal overthrow of the government, the communists were not seen as an official country by Western nations, but eventually by 1924, Britain and France and Italy granted official recognition to the Soviet Union. In 1933, the United States did the same and began to establish trade relations with the Soviet Union, despite the fact that people in their country basically had no human rights. Okay, so let's look at fascism in Italy and Germany. Now, we're just going to look at Italy today. But fascism is a style of government. It is important to understand today. Interestingly, I teach this in U.S. history, and you guys have probably heard these things. Obviously, Trump's been called a Nazi. Trump has been called a fascist. Ronald Reagan was called a fascist. Dwight Eisenhower was called a fascist. It's nothing new, like I said, for people to be called fascists or Nazis by people who want to paint them as someone who's the opposite of them. Now, none of those people I just named are fascists or Nazis. Interestingly, it was just in the last couple of years, Google changed the definition of fascism to say it is a move of the political right. And when we say the political right, conservatives would be on the right, and socialists would be on the left. Some people would say liberals are on the left, but I think the word liberal needs to be redefined. It's been redefined to mean people on the left, but it originally did not mean that. So we'll get into that more in government class next year. Hopefully I didn't just confuse you. I'm not trying to confuse you. But I want to make the argument that Nazism and fascism is more of a move of the left. Here's why I say that. At least the way American politics work, the right, the conservatives want less government control, less government. Okay, fascism and Nazism, they want more government control, just like socialism and communism want more government control. They just do it a different way and maybe have different ideologies. But I think Nazism and and fascism are technically moves of the political left. They're very similar to socialism. We're going to talk about it here in a moment, but Mussolini was a part of the Socialist Party. The Nazis' official name is the National Socialist German Workers' Party. That's what it stands for. It's got socialism in the name. The Soviet Union has socialism in the name, which is communist. People do agree that's on the left, but these other two are very tied to socialism to some degree. So obviously, they're going to differ a little bit, fascism and Nazism, but they're going to be somewhat similar. So how do communism and fascism differ? Uh, Under communism, the government takes over business and agriculture and all industry completely, like they own it. Under fascism, businesses are still allowed to be privately owned. However, they are still rigorously controlled by the government. Okay, so under fascism, there is private ownership of businesses, but those businesses are still being told what to do by the government, being told, here's your quota, here's what we want you to build. Uh, so fascism's a little bit different. It doesn't own the businesses; it just controls what they do. Under communism, the government both owns and controls businesses. Fascism is highly nationalistic. It's going to turn out. So in Italy and Germany, which are going to be the two biggest fascist examples from this time period, they're highly nationalistic, meaning very prideful in their country. As far as Nazis go, which would be fascism in Germany, they're going to be way too nationalistic. I mean, the Italians are going to be too, but not even to the degree of the Germans where they feel they're racially superior to other countries. Now, communism, ideally, we've yet to see an ideal communist country. But ideally, communism seeks to have a classless international society where you do not have nations. Okay. However, every communist nation that has started has turned out to end up being a dictatorship, and they end up being pretty nationalistic in a lot of ways, even though they're supposed to be seeking international society. A military dictatorship openly governs a fascist state. In communism, it's supposed to emphasize the dictatorship of the proletariat so that the people run the country. But you can look around the world today. Cuba is still communist. North Korea is still communist. Are those led and run by the people? No, they're led by a dictator. So for Nazis and the fascists, they openly govern as a military dictatorship. Communists try to say they're not ruling that way, but it pretty much is a military dictatorship that has run communist countries. Fascism glorifies the state. Like I already said, communism teaches that the state will gradually wither away. However, no communist country has seen the state wither away. Instead, they also seem to glorify their state as well. They try to glorify their power through their state. Let's look at fascism in Italy, and we'll finish here today. It doesn't mean I'm almost done. We'll take a little bit of time on this. So Italy entered the post-war era after World War I dissatisfied. They were a part of the Allies. They were one of the big four leaders we talked about, Vittorio Orlando being present. And what Italy primarily wanted out of the Treaty of Versailles was to gain some land in their north that they felt belonged to them and not to Germany. However, they were not given that land. When Italy joined the war effort in World War I, they actually joined it with the understanding that they probably would gain access to that land. But the British and the French were the ones who gained all the land from Germany. And Italy kind of came out on the losing side there, despite the fact that Italy lost over 500,000 troops in World War I. Mussolini, as we saw, served in World War I. He was a sharpshooter. He was, before World War I, he was a socialist writer, definitely tied to the socialists. His father was even a well-known socialist. He wrote for several socialist newspapers, had very violent articles. It incurred the wrath of the authorities. He was imprisoned on multiple occasions because of that. So Mussolini's political roots lie in socialism. Over time, he began to think socialism in the form it wasn't very workable and would not lead to you being able to take control and have power. So he helped create a new political party, the Fascist Party. They took as its symbol the fasces, which, if you remember, this is from a while back, but it was the axe with the rods around it. That is the symbol of fascism. Now that symbol is used in other areas that are not have nothing to do with fascism. The Lincoln Memorial has a fascist on it, so it's been a symbol that's been used before fascism even became a thing. But the fascists decided to use that. Once again, they kind of want to return to the power of the Roman Empire. Italy, I mean, since the fall of the Roman Empire, was continually trying to gain back that prestige they had when the Romans were in power. So they use that as a symbol of their authority. Really, what ends up happening too is the people in Italy are very displeased with their government and how things are going. They are also, however, aren't very on board with the socialists and communists, who seem pretty radical and seem to be promoting labor unions, which are doing violence. Um, so Mussolini kind of offers a alternative, which would be the fascists. And he has a lot of the soldiers who are on his side, those men who came back and weren't able to find jobs, kind of join the fascist party because they're disillusioned with what's going on in Italy, and they feel Mussolini's the man to lead them to becoming a powerful country once again. So in October of 1922, feeling the time was right, Mussolini and thousands of his followers marched into Rome and demanded that he would be made the premier of Italy, which is basically like the prime minister. King Victor Emmanuel II, feeling he had no other choice, appointed him as the premier and agreed to the fascist demands. Mussolini became the new leader of Italy. Now, he's still the premier. He's not quite the dictator yet, but over time, through political moves, through placing more of his people in different positions of power, by 1925, he is pretty much the unrivaled ruler of Italy. He takes the title Il Duce, which simply just means leader or commander. He puts in place a highly structured organization, which has local fascist parties, but also a fascist Grand Council. Uh, Technically, the Grand Council runs the government, but really, once again, Mussolini's the power behind all of it and the one who really controls everything. One of Mussolini's major goals was to make Italy economically self sufficient. So he didn't want them to have to rely on other countries for goods. He wanted them to produce everything they needed on their own. Part of this is going to come up a little bit later. This won't be till next chapter. But part of that would be gaining maybe some colonies that would have some of the things that they needed. But he didn't want to rely on other countries for things like iron and oil and all of the manufacturing. He wanted to build that up himself to be self-sufficient as a country. Um, so to do this, he started a program called Autarky, which was an organized effort to put the Italian workforce into 13 syndicates, each of which represented a different division of the workforce. Under the watchful eye of the government, the syndicates established wages and prices, business policies, working conditions, and kind of set goals for different businesses, even agriculture. Here's what the agriculture is going to grow. Now, once again, you could own your own business, but the government's kind of telling you what you would do. Unlike Stalin and Hitler, however, Mussolini had no clearly defined political program. Um, like most dictators, however, he did suppress freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and any other political parties. So you pretty much needed to be a fascist if you were going to live in Italy at this point in time, or don't speak your mind because you had no other uh, way to let your voice be heard. Mussolini enacted a series of popular agreements known as the Lateran treaties. These were with the Catholic Church. So you may be like, well, see, he didn't take out the church, and certainly he didn't. Uh, the Nazis in Germany also aren't going to 100% take out the church, although they will take it out a little bit. Really, the communists are the ones who were most anti-religion. The Nazis were anti-religion, but not as much. Mussolini has a unique situation. The Roman Catholic Church is inside of Italy and in the city of Rome. And he knows that if he tries to take over the Catholic Church and get rid of the Catholic Church, he will become extremely unpopular in Italy and will lose his power. So instead of doing that, he decides to work out a deal with the Catholic Church, in which the Catholic Church gave up all of their lands to Italy because they controlled different lands on different parts of Italy. And in return, They would gain the area of land which today is known as the Vatican City, and it wouldn't even be under the Italian control. It would be completely under the Pope's control and completely owned by the Roman Catholic Church, and that still exists today. The Vatican City is technically an independent state and not a part of Italy, despite the fact that it is literally in the middle of Rome. It is a independent country. It's the smallest country in the world. Um, I believe population wise and geographic size wise, I believe it is the smallest. Um, so, like I said, he did this to remain popular with the people. It wasn't because he was a Catholic or he believed in Catholic ideals or was a religious person. He just knew that politically it was a good move to make the Catholic Church happy and to try to keep the people in Italy happy. All right, that's where we're going to end notes for today. I do want you to answer one more question besides the ones that I said at the beginning and the ones that will be on your notes. It's a simple one. Once again, I've already asked what your favorite color is, what your favorite movie is. Now I'm asking, what is your favorite number? And if you don't have one, I guess put I don't have one, but mine is the number 13. I can explain it to you another time as to why. But if you have a favorite number, tell me what that is. I'm going to sign off here, and we will continue this next week as we'll start looking at Nazi Germany. Hope you guys are doing well.